Good evening. Welcome to the Jamie Glazov Show. We have a very special guest with us this evening, Dr. Daniel Pipes, the president of the Middle East Forum, and Toby Distinguished Visiting Fellow at the Hoover Institution of Stanford University. Dr. Pipes has written 12 books, including Militant Islam Reaches America. You can visit Dr. Pipes' website at danielpipes.org. Dr. Pipes is joining us this evening to discuss the controversy recently sparked by Newt Gingrich, who on a Jewish television station called the Palestinians, quote, an invented people. Now, despite the usual suspects coming forward to denounce Newt Gingrich, the question remains, is what Newt said a historical fact? We have the main and leading expert on this issue with us today. Dr. Pipes, it is a pleasure and a privilege to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us, Dr. Pipes. Dr. Pipes, in the year 2000, in the Jerusalem Post, an article by you appeared, The Year the Arabs Discovered Palestine. A longer version of that article appeared a little bit earlier in the summer of 1989 in the Middle East Review. Dr. Pipes, that article substantiates what Newt Gingrich has said, and apparently 1920 is a very significant year. Can you give us your wisdom on this issue?
Sure, my pleasure, yes. Newt Gingrich said in one sentence what took me some 8,000 words. I note that first...
Can you speak up a little bit, just to make sure our listeners hear you?
Historically, Jews have the concept of haaretz, the land, and Christians the notion of terra sancta, the sacred land, which refers, roughly speaking, to the area that Israel presently occupies. Muslims have no such concept. There is no notion of a Palestine, of a holy land in Islam. And there has been historically no Muslim polity, no Muslim government that specifically covered that area, the Christian and Jewish polities. And so in 1918, when the British conquered this area and called it Palestine, it was a victory for the Zionist movement to have an area delineated called Palestine that included terra sancta haaretz. The Muslims initially responded to this new notion by rejecting it. They considered themselves primarily to be Syrians. The notion of Syria, which we today ascribe to the state of Syria, historically refers to a larger area that includes the state of Syria, Lebanon, Israel, the Palestinian areas, and Jordan. It's a geographic cultural notion analogous to Scandinavia. There's never been a Scandinavia, a country called Scandinavia, but it's a cultural geographic region. It is clearly delineated. People understand what it means. Sham, or Syria, was likewise a historic region. And that's what the people of this area consider themselves to be: Syrians, Muslim, Arabic speakers. But this notion of Palestine exists because the people now of this unit called Palestine, created by the British after World War I, because they had to deal with the institutions of Palestine, they reluctantly agreed to present themselves as Palestinians. It was official, reluctant act. Between 1920 and today, the notion of Palestine has grown. It's no longer just something done in order to fit into the British imperial structure. It's now something that has a life of its own. And I don't deny that. I don't say that Palestinian nationalism is a fraud. No, it's real, very real. But it's very clear at the same time that the notion of Palestine, Palestinian, goes back last century. And that's, in this sense, Gingrich is absolutely right. Now, many of the criticisms of Gingrich have been around the fact that there are other invented nationalities. For example, Jordan.
Dr. Pipes, sorry to interrupt. I'm getting feedback from our chat room that the listeners are having a hard time hearing you. Kindly just speak up a little bit. Thank you.
Okay. There are other invented nationalities. For example, Jordan came into existence just a year later, in 1921. There's no historic Jordan that goes back hundreds of years or millennia. The difference is that no one is claiming that there's a Jordanian nationality that goes back centuries and millennia. But there are people who are claiming there's such an identity for Palestinians. For example, the PLO has long said that Jesus was a Palestinian. Or they argue that the Jebusites, the people of the Bible, were the first Palestinians. The Canaanites were Palestinians. And so this notion of Palestinian has been extended backwards for millennia. That's a fraud. There is no such concept. The notion of Palestinian came into existence less than a century ago.
Dr. Pipes, here's another problem. When the Palestinians do speak of a homeland, which now I guess we're seeing historically never really ever existed, but even when they speak of a homeland, where exactly is it? It's not really in the West Bank. It's not in Gaza. Are we correct that it's in Israel? When they speak of a homeland, it really means that they want to destroy Israel.
Absolutely. The maps of the Palestinian Authority, and more broadly, the maps that you'll find in Arabic of Palestine, invariably show all of mandatory Palestine. In other words, all of Israel is included within it. I have never seen a map in Arabic or produced by Arabs that shows a Palestine next to an Israel. Never.
Dr. Pipes, is it an exaggeration? Is it accurate to say the following, that the Palestinians were actually invented as a weapon to destroy Israel?
Well, as I said, the notion of Palestinian goes back to the First World War, the aftermath of the First World War. At that time, the term Palestine was a Zionist term. In other words, creating a unit called Palestine was an achievement for the Jewish national movement. And the Zionist movement celebrated it.
And the Muslim Arabs actually opposed it.
Right. There was the Palestine Post, the Palestine Symphony, the Palestine this, the Palestine that. It was Zionist. But in 1948, the Zionists abandoned the term Palestine and adopted the term Israel, leaving this term available for the anti-Zionists, who then picked it up and over the years have made it their term. So now Palestinian represents anti-Israel. And indeed, again, if one looks at maps, one sees that Palestine replaces Israel.
So let me ask this then. How do we give the Palestinians a homeland when in fact the very existence of the Palestinians depends on destroying Israel? Is there not something incompatible happening here?
The conventional answer to that is to create a Palestine adjoining Israel, the so-called two-state solution, which is the policy of the U.S. government and reluctantly the policy of the Israeli government, and also formally speaking the policy of the Palestinian Authority. I would say that is not feasible. That were there to come into existence a Palestine that's made up of the Bank or the West Bank and Gaza, it would be primarily devoted to eliminating Israel. It would not be a good neighbor. It would not be. The rulers of this statelet would not be content with what territory they're given. They would be wholly engaged in eliminating Israel, and therefore it's not workable. What's the point?
Yeah. Now,
let's be realistic.
Now, Dr. Pipes, a lot of people do not know this, but inside this whole charade, inside this whole lie about the Palestinian people, Palestinian homeland, etc., actually the KGB's hand is involved here. Could you just briefly speak on that in the context of that people like Arafat and this whole thing, they were actually trained by the KGB, and some of this has been influenced by the KGB?
No question that the Soviets in the 60s in particular used this nascent Palestinian movement as a vehicle for their own ends. Israel was the American ally. The Soviets glommed on to this Palestinian movement and trained either in the Soviet Union itself or in Soviet bloc countries, Soviet advisors, Soviet arms, Soviet money, the PLO, yes.
Now, I recommend for all of our listeners to go to danielpipes.org and to read Daniel Pipes' article, "The Year the Arabs Discovered Palestine." I mean, so many facts there that a lot of people didn't know, and I was surprised to read a few things. Dr. Pipes, I mean, you write in that article that in fact national sentiment was actually taught to the Arabs and Muslims by Europeans, that there wasn't even a sense of nationalism among Arabs and Muslims. Am I correct?
Nationalism is an import to the Muslim majority countries, just as, say, using forks and knives or wearing a tie.
Mm-hmm.
These are European customs, ideas, institutions that were exported to live into the Middle East that had no historic basis. In other words, pre-modern Middle East had the family, clan, tribe on the one hand, and the world of Muslims, the Ummah, the community of Muslims on the other hand. So one rather small, tribes can be large, and the other quasi-universal. There was no allegiance to the state. In other words, there were always states. Take Egypt. Egypt is a state that goes back thousands of years, and it's pretty much always been the same Egypt. It's like an island surrounded by desert. And Egypt has been ruled by many different leaders, dynasties. But through the Muslim period, until modern time, there's very little allegiance to Egypt or to the Egyptian government. It wasn't important. It would be like for Americans, we are all living in a county. We're all residents of a county. Who will proclaim his county to be his identity? It's just a bureaucratic delineation that has no particular importance to our identity. Who would die for his county? These are not important units. Likewise, the government of Egypt had no importance. And there's no nationalism. There's no sense that Egypt is your country and your identity. And Egypt at least has a historic existence, whereas a place like Sham or Syria has no. It's just a vague notion. No reality, no governmental reality.
Well, this phenomenon, in fact, alone legitimizes what Gingrich is saying. Dr. Pipes, you say something very intriguing in your article. Quote, the primacy of Palestinian nationalism could eventually come to an end, perhaps as quickly as it got started. What do you think about that today, 12 years later, after writing that article?
I see identities in the Middle East as fluid. That in one era, one is Egyptian, another one is Arab, third one is Muslim, and likewise with people who we're now calling Palestinian. Hamas, for example, doesn't particularly emphasize the Palestinian nature of the Gaza that it rules. It emphasizes the Islamic nature. So I can imagine that the drive towards a Palestinian state having failed, the people who call themselves today Palestinians would rather lose interest, could take up some other identity. There's fluidity. There are alternatives. It changes. For example, the drive against Zionism has had four different natures over the last century. It was, until 1943, primarily pan-Syrian, that was Sham, and until 1967, primarily pan-Arab, the idea that Arabs from rock are part of a single state. Then it was Palestinian in the sense of the flag and the country, Palestine. And now there's a fourth dimension, which is Islamic. So it's extremely complex. Things are fluid. These are not fixed identities. They change over time. And you take a country like Jordan, extremely complex. That you have the East Bankers and the West Bankers, Bedouin, Palestinian, relationship between them. King is a Bedouin, queen is a Palestinian. The military is, and the security forces are Bedouin. Commercial leadership is Palestinian. Very complex.
Dr. Pipes, Gingrich is taking a lot of heat here. I mean, we live in a world where you simply can't say the truth. He's being attacked, but at the same time, is it not true that within the PLO charter, within the statements of many Arab leaders and even Palestinian leaders, this also has been admitted over the years?
Yes, many Palestinian.
Can you give us an example of maybe something in the charter, or maybe some things that the leaders themselves have said or boasted about?
Can't give you an exact quote, but I did write a book called Greater Syria, The History of Ambition, that came out in 1990, which is replete with quotes by Palestinian leaders who acknowledge that the Palestinian identity is of an invention. It was something that was useful at a certain time and place. That really, Palestinians, Syria, really they are Arab. Really they are. Yeah, there are plenty of. I'm sorry, I don't have any.
Dr. Pipes, is Palestinian nationalism in the end just anti-Zionism?
Interesting question. Palestinian, the short answer is yes. The very word Palestinian, as I noted before, began as a Zionist word, and then the Zionists left it, and the anti-Zionists picked it up. And over again, you find that Zionist names, institutions, ideas are picked up by anti-Zionists. For example, the leader of the Zionist movement for several decades was a man called Chaim Weizmann. He was an eminent scientist, and he was based in London. And he traveled through Europe, even to the United States, to further the Zionist cause. Very unusual, indeed unique, unprecedented. But along a few decades later comes Yasser Arafat, who does the same thing on behalf of the Palestinians, travels the world to promote the Palestinian cause. In Palestine, mandatory Palestine, there was something called the Yishuv, which was the Zionist self-government. It wasn't official, it wasn't a state, but it had an army and it had an economic arm and it had a security agency, and basically it had the functions of a government. And so when Israel became a state in 1948, the Yishuv was transformed easily into the function of state apparatus. Well, you won't find that anywhere in the world except right next door. Today, there's a Palestinian Authority. It is not a state, but has the functions of a state. Or you take something like the Jewish National Fund, which bought land on behalf of the Zionist movement. There's now a Palestinian National Fund that echoes it. And even more importantly, Zionism, the very word, is about love of Zion. What is that? That's love of Jerusalem. Focus on Jerusalem as the heart and soul of Jewish religion, the geographically central. Well, what do you know? There's now a Muslim Zion. Now, enormous emphasis on Jerusalem, claims that Jerusalem is a central city for Islam, and so forth and so on. So, to give one example, in the year 2000, when there were negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians, there were negotiations over the Temple Mount, the most holy site for Jews and a holy place for Muslims as well. What was so striking is that this was a religious topic, not a strategic one, not an economic one, but a religious one. And Ehud Barak, the Prime Minister of Israel, just did it on his own, consulted no one. There was a lot of unhappiness among Jews around the world who thought they should have a say, that certain parts of Jerusalem would be handed over to the Palestinians. And in contrast, Yasser Arafat traveled extensively to get opinions of other Muslims about whether you should accept this Jerusalem. So what you had then, and what I see often, is that Muslims have now developed in more Zionist passion than Jews have. So again and again, you see that the Palestinian movement is what Germans call the doppelganger, the kind of evil twin of the Zionist movement, copying it in the end.
Now, Dr. Pipes, we're going to go to the phone lines in a second, but I want to ask you personally, is you're a leading scholar on this, you've dedicated your life to this, you're also dedicated your life to telling the truth about history, and this is not a popular truth. How did you feel with Gingrich coming out and actually bravely saying something that is not permitted in the boundaries of even academic discourse, I don't think? Was this inspiring to you?
Let me first note that I am actually a historian.
Yeah.
With a PhD in medieval history. Well, it's always refreshing when a leading politician makes a statement like this that cuts through and creates a furor. I imagine he had no idea it would do so. I myself have been in that situation where a throwaway remark becomes the center of a little storm. But he has confirmed it, and I think it's excellent. Now, the one criticism that has some interest. I mean, historically, it's clear cut that he's right. But the more interesting criticism of him is that this is not operationally useful. That by talking the truth like this, were he to become president, he makes it more difficult to have Palestinian-Israeli negotiations. To which I would say, one, there are no Palestinian-Israeli negotiations underway, and two, even more importantly, the Palestinian-Israeli negotiations that have been going on in a substantive way since 1993 have been counterproductive. The situation was better in 1993 before the Oslo Accords than it is today. These are negotiations that are premature and falsely premised, so that his remarks might make such negotiations less.
Dr. Pipes, do you think that it was just the moment, it was just in the moment, or do you think that Gingrich was calculating something by coming out saying something like this in terms of his campaign, maybe trying to get certain support? Is there anything behind this? Is there anything behind the timing?
From my experience, I would say that this is one of those things that simply takes off. You can never predict it, and I would not. I mean, he's a font of ideas, a whole range of subjects. He's very much an intellectual who loves to look at situations and provide political analyses of them, and that's what he's done here. I would suspect, if you looked at the record, he said this a dozen times before, and that I would suspect this came as a complete surprise to him, that an off-the-cuff remark of this sort, throwaway remark of this sort, has gendered such a debate. But certainly that's what happened to me on a number of occasions. I'd make some throwaway remark, and then for the next 2 weeks I was firestorm around me, and I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah, so sometimes it's unpredictable when a comment will take off. We're going to go to our phone lines. We have Stephen from Toronto, Canada. Are you there?
Yes, I am, Jamie.
Stephen, you have a question for Dr. Pipes?
Yeah, Dr. Pipes, knowing the Palestinians as you do, how would you regard this remark by Newt Gingrich in terms of establishing a state? Do you think they're thinking, oh my God, we should grab the best deal now from Obama, who's very sympathetic to us, or should we just keep going on and dragging things out, hopefully to destroy Israel?
I guess you're implying on that question that this statement might make a big impact, right?
Exactly, on negotiations, on the way they view things. Like, it's not going to be business as usual if Gingrich gets in.
Well, good question. I don't think the statement itself makes that much difference. In other words, one can agree that I'm agreeing that Palestinians are invented people, and saying at the same time there is a Palestinian nationalism. I recognize it. You know, its origins 90 years ago are not terribly important today. It is there. Fair enough. But I think what you're getting at is something larger, not this specific statement, but the fact that a Republican, and it really doesn't matter which one, other than Ron Paul, who I don't consider Republican, that any Republican president will have a fundamentally different attitude towards Israel and the Arab-Israeli conflict, one that is far more warm towards Israel and cooler towards negotiations. And so then the question is, might the Palestinians rush and try and do something before that happens? No, I don't see it. From my point of view, as someone who's unenthusiastic about Palestinian-Israeli negotiations, who sees these as counterproductive, I'm quite pleased with Obama. Because what Obama did is make a series of mistakes which prompted the Palestinians to walk away in a huff from the negotiations, demanding more and more, being more and more unrealistic, and the whole thing has collapsed, which from my point of view is a good idea. I want to see resolution of the Arab-Israeli conflict and then go to the negotiating table. In other words, I see the goal, our goal, American goal, is having our ally, Israel, win. I want to win this war. I want our ally to win this war. I don't want to see compromise and negotiation and mediation as the way forward. I think we want to win. That's what the Palestinians want. They want to win. But we and the Israelis have decided there's no such thing as victory. There's just kind of, making painful concessions. No, our side should win. Palestinians should come to accept an Israel, Jewish state of Israel. No ifs or buts. And then once they've done that, then you go to the negotiating table and figure out where the boundaries are and what the rights are here and water rights and Jerusalem and refugees and so forth. So I don't want negotiations, and I'm rather pleased with Obama because he's done such a terrible job of achieving his goals that he's actually achieved mine.
So we just have 2 or 3 minutes left. We're going to go to Mark from Atlanta, Georgia. Mark, are you there?
Yes, I am, Jamie.
Mark, you have a question for Dr. Pipes.
I do, Dr. Pipes, and let me begin by just saying that I've enjoyed your scholarship over the years, and I've learned a tremendous amount about the region by reading your articles. Really excellent. My question has to do with the fact that you have written and have actually quite clearly demonstrated that this Palestinian nationalism originated out of political calculus. And I'm wondering, I was somewhat disappointed in that debate when Newt responded to the obvious disdain of Diane Sawyer, that he didn't come back at her with, attacking the media. But I'm wondering, in your view, what role has the U.S. media played in promulgating and promoting this big lie that there is such a thing as Palestinian nationalism that goes back millennia?
The media have certainly been part of it, so has the Academy, and to a certain extent so has the government. The main sources of information on this topic, or most any topic, have not been accurately portraying it. The good news is that there now is alternative media, such as the very one that we're on right now, which is looking in a much more intelligent way at complex problems such as this one. So there's an opening, and many, like ourselves, are taking advantage of it.
Dr. Pipes, our time has come to an end. It was an honor and a privilege to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Jamie.
And thank you for all that you do, Dr. Pipes, and I hope you'll be coming back on the show soon. Thank you.
I look forward to it.
Okay, take care.
Goodbye.
And ladies and gentlemen, once again, this is the Jamie Glazov Show. We are talking this evening about the invented people. The controversial comment that was just made by Newt Gingrich. We now have another expert joining us this evening, David Mayer Levy. He is the author of Big Lies, Demolishing the Myths of the Propaganda War Against Israel. He writes and lectures on Middle East topics until recently in the History Department of San Jose State University. Mr. Mayer Levy, are you with us?
I am here.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Dr. Pipes, paved the foundation for our discussion today. We're going to be going over some of those facts, but let me just ask you very quickly, just your brief thoughts right away on what Gingrich was saying, the controversy that was sparked. How do you come at this?
Well, there's no question in my mind as an historian that he is completely correct. The entire concept of a Palestinian people, historic Palestine, and all the things that Dr. Pipes mentioned earlier, these are all fictions that were created initially in 1920 and then given real political shape after 1967. It's all fabrication. It's all lies. Now, the problem is that Dr. Gingrich, and he is a doctor, he has a PhD in history, spoke about a fairly complex, difficult topic, a topic which may be incendiary, and a topic which may, and probably already has, generate considerable blowback and aggravation, all of which may make the whole situation for Israel more difficult. And that's a problem, in my opinion, because if someone, in this case a leader, a serious contender for the presidency, understands this reality and incorporates it into his strategies, into his programs for working with Israel and working either with or against the other side, that's great. But if he kind of like blurts it out in the middle of nowhere, I'm not sure that's a good idea. It doesn't seem very perspicacious to me. And I think that Mitt Romney's response, and it's not that I'm taking sides one or the other, but simply in this case, Mitt Romney's response was very intelligent. He said, before I would shoot my mouth off about something as incendiary as this, I'd call my good friend Bibi Netanyahu and ask him, hey, Bibi, if I say this, will this be helpful for you?
Right.
And we would see what Bibi would say. So,
now, in terms of political calculation, it may not have been the shrewdest thing to do, but in terms of the courage to state the truth in a sea of lies, do we respect him, and are we inspired for his courage in stating the unstatable?
Unstatable, right.
What Melanie Phillips says in A World Turned Upside Down.
Right. Absolutely. And that's what I said. I'm not like taking sides, but absolutely correct. He has the courage to say the truth, even though he knows the truth is unpopular in many, many circles. And I think Dr. Pikes mentioned academia, journalism, certain members of our government. So he had the courage to do that. Whether it was a good idea or not politically is a different question, but basically you are correct. I would certainly congratulate him for his courage and for the obvious insight that he has into a very badly distorted history.
Mr. Mayor Levy, let me ask you this. Now, you're the author of Big Lies, Demolishing the Myths of the Propaganda War Against Israel. I mean, you just puncture one after the other every myth. But here's the question. Why all these myths, and why can't our culture accept this? Like, in the sense that, I mean, what Gingrich has said, I mean, this is just unspeakable in terms of the boundaries of discourse that the left has created.
Yes.
Why do you think it's so difficult for why has it become so difficult for our culture and society to accept that this is a lie?
Well, there are a couple of different aspects to the answer to that question. And since I know our time is limited, I'll try and be very brief. Okay, the first aspect is what sometimes is referred to as the opinion makers, which basically is our mainstream media. You know, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Los Angeles Times. These are the major newspapers whose spin on the news is taken as reality by the overwhelming majority of readers. Mm-hmm. Now, there is some sort of complicity among our mainstream media with the promulgation of the Arab narrative. The Arab narrative is what we're talking about now, about the Palestinians being from time immemorial, and the lies that are almost daily rendered at the UN against Israel in terms of using excessive force or trying to drive Palestinians out, all that stuff. Now, why the media is complicit is not clear. I could guess, but I don't like to speculate. However, that there is complicity becomes clear when you read a study which was done about 10 years ago, and it's called Complicity, and I can provide you with the exact details if you want later. If any listeners want to contact me by email, I'll be happy to give them all the sources.
Give your email to the listener.
Oh, sure, good idea. Yeah, the easiest way is to go to David _ and then my last name, Meir Levy, M as in Mary, EIRLEV as in Victor, I, not Y, but I. Meir Levy, MEIRLEVI, at hotmail.com. David _ Meir Levy at hotmail.com. So
and you can see Mr. David Meir Levy's article in Front Page today. It's the lead story. It's called An Invented People.
Yes,
go ahead.
Right. Okay. So the complicity becomes clear because the people that did this report surveyed dozens and dozens of mainstream media outlets in the USA and Canada, and what they found, quite to their amazement, is that almost without exception, the presentation of any article starts off with things which are clearly positive about the Palestinians, about the Arabs in general, about Islam, and the input from Palestinian spokespersons or Arab spokespersons is couched in language of acceptance. They said this: Here's what happened. However, when it gets to the Israeli side, the language is couched in, well, the Israelis contend that. Well, the Israeli side said that this wasn't true. The subtleness of it is very important, but it's also very powerful because the reader is left with the impression that the Arab side is telling us what happened, and the Israeli side is giving a spin or an opinion. Or another example, very frequently it happened over the years when the Intifada was raging, that there would be a newspaper article about some attack, but the picture next to the article would not show the bus that was blown up or the Israelis who were killed or Israelis mourning at the death of 53 innocent people on a bus in downtown Jerusalem. No, it would show a photograph of the family, of the Arab family of the suicide bomber. Now, what's going to hit you first? Where's the visceral grab? Obviously, it's the picture. So the papers, on purpose, this can't be an accident. Too many newspapers, too many years, have spun the situation so the reader develops an affinity for and a sympathy for the Arab side. And had I not read this book, Complicity, I wouldn't be able to make these statements. But they did the research. They did the statistics. So the media is complicit, and it seeks to give to the reading public an image that the Arab side is the one with which we should feel empathy. So that's the first. That's why people sort of feel like, okay, these poor Palestinians, they deserve a state. They've been waiting for 2,000 years, whatever. That's number one. Number two, there is a complicity in some parts of academia also. And this is a very terrible thing to say. This is an undermining of the most basic principles of rational thought and honest inquiry in our society. The university is supposed to be the marketplace of ideas, but time and again we find academics, tenured professors, untenured professors, who literally spout an Arab line where they should be offering rational evaluation, insightful analysis. And when you find the Arab line spouted over and over again in a very similar language across dozens of universities and scores of professors, you know that something is wrong.
Let me interrupt for a minute, Mr. Mayor Levy. I apologize. David, you lectured in the history department of the San Jose State University.
Right.
You've been around academics.
Yes.
Did you find this a very strong environment, this anti-Semitic environment? Were you demonized? Were you persecuted in some way in that environment?
No, I personally was not. However, I do know that some students certainly felt that way, and they came to me for advice because I was the pro-Israel side there on the campus. I worked closely with Hillel at San Jose State. The Hillel director there was excellent. She did a wonderful job of supporting the students. And they would come to me and say, look, my professor said this. I know this can't be right. Can you help me? So I would sit down with him or her and say...
But they don't want it to be right. Am I correct? Like in terms of a law, like even all my life arguing with leftists, even right now I ran into 2-3 people about Gingrich's statement. And they're appalled. They're morally indignant. But if I say, read this article by David Mayer Levy, read this article by Pipes, they don't want to read it. They don't want to know it. They want to be part of a certain clique. And they want to be popular, and they want to be against Israel and for the Palestinians.
Correct. And that basically is the third side of my answer to your first question. The receptors of some large swath of our population to the skewed presentations that we find in academia and in journalism are very, very high among some people. Now, you're using the term leftists. I don't know. I try to stay away from political terminology, but there are people for whom it is very important that they be identified with the group that supports the underdog. And the cast that is spun on the whole situation in the Middle East, and especially with
the Palestinians.
The Palestinians are the underdog.
When in fact it's the Israelis that are really...
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly correct. Now, why they refuse to read an article or listen to an argument and respond with logic or acknowledge that they've been wrong, that's another question. And I can only answer that from my experience in the classroom in one-on-one presentations and with whole very large audiences? And the answer is, it becomes a religion.
Yeah, it's a religious faith.
It's the ideology among certain people, and unfortunately it's a lot of people, ideology will always trump facts.
Yeah.
And I've had people say to me, I was kind of amazed. I got to a point when I was discussing things with people, I said, look, I want you to tell me, are you open to input if I can demonstrate to you factually that certain, whatever we're talking about is not correct and there is another side? Are you open to the possibility that you can change your mind? Now, of course, people said, of course I am. Well, yeah, and then they don't. But
yeah, because they would lose all their friends. And,
that's right.
Yeah.
But some actually said, no, look, I believe the Palestinians are an occupied people and the Israelis are brutal, and that's all there is to it.
Yeah.
Okay, so then why are we talking? You've already
but David, in your article today,
yes,
An Invented People,
right,
you mention Arafat's mentoring by the Soviets.
Yes.
We touched on this a little bit earlier with Dr. Pipes. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about that? The KGB has actually framed the boundaries of this whole thing here.
Yes, that's correct. And this is a chapter of the Cold War that is known only to a very small number of people, including those who were smart enough to read my other book, The History Upside Down, which was my second book. Okay. And there I go into much more detail. See, what happened was, in the 60s, the Russians were looking around for ways to confront the West without engaging in military activity. And they needed a way to expand their influence into the Third World that would not arouse the Truman Doctrine. The Truman Doctrine, for those who don't remember, was we'll go basically anywhere in the world to make sure that we can help the people who are being confronted by communism. That was expanded later into the Kennedy Doctrine. We'll fight any battle, we'll engage in any war, and it is much more dramatic. But the basic idea was America stands for peace and capitalism and freedom and democracy, and where that is threatened in the world, we will help. So the Russians, who are pretty smart, said, we don't want to prod America to actually responding. We need to do it in a more subtle way. And what they came up with was the following. We have plenty of disgruntled people in the world. If we can train them to covert terrorist activity, we can topple governments in the Third World and replace them with governments more in our camp. And one of the things that happened in the late 1960s and early 1970s was that Arafat rose to the top as the leading terrorist of that decade, and in fact that whole century, basically. He was an amazingly adroit and powerful person, even though he was a short, chubby guy with a stupid beard. It doesn't matter. The main thing is he caught the Russians' attention. So what they did in the late 60s, early 70s, was they literally took him under their wing. They took his adjutants, his main lieutenants, and brought them to Moscow and trained them at the Patrice Lumumba Friendship University in Moscow. It's a good name. The university is teaching you how to be a terrorist. So then they deployed them. And in my book, I describe in considerable detail the deployment of Palestinian terrorists in Arafat's terrorist army going to Cuba to train activists in Cuba who would go to other parts of South America and start movements to overthrow the pro-Western governments in South American countries. Same thing happened in various parts of Asia. So Arafat became basically I wouldn't call him a puppet, but a partner with the KGB, and his handler. How we know all this, by the way, is because his main handler, was the head of Romanian security, his man named Ion Mihai Paspa. And Paspa eventually fled to the West when he saw that Ceausescu's days were numbered, and he debriefed the CIA, the FBI, and the government, and they were like, oh, my God, this is horrible. But they didn't do anything against Arafat. So what he explained was basically that Arafat was talked into getting this backing from Russia so he could have money and he could have weapons and he could get training, and all he had to do was be willing to send his troops where the Russians wanted. And that's exactly what happened. And numerous terrorist attacks around all the world were orchestrated by the Russians through him and a few other people, but he was the top one.
Okay, David.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt for a minute because we want to at least give the chance for some callers to ask you a few questions.
Sure.
And David, we're very strict here on the Jamie Glazov Show because we have so many callers. When a question is asked by a caller, if you think it's a stupid question, you just say it's a stupid question and we move on to the next caller and you don't even have to answer it, okay?
Totally fine.
Okay, we're going to go to Stephen from Toronto, Canada.
Hello, David.
Hello.
Do you have an intelligent question, Stephen?
Well, I have a question.
Okay. We'll see. Go ahead.
Dave, the way you describe those people in academia who are so pro-Palestinian reminds me of the old Soviet Union days, of so many of them in academia who were pro-Soviet. My question is this: all these people you described, how many would you say would you classify as leftists?
I couldn't answer that question. It's not a stupid question by any manner of means, but I can't answer that because there's no statistics for us, and there isn't even a definition of what exactly a leftist is. I mean,
how about empirical observation? How many would you say are left or center?
Left of center, the majority.
Majority, eh?
51, 55, 59%, 60%, somewhere in that area. Now, there happens to be a very good book called The Uncivil University, which attempts to do exactly that. And what it points out is that in most universities throughout the country, with a couple of exceptions, the majority of the tenured faculty are Democrats, not Republicans, and consider themselves to be leftist, liberal, as opposed to conservative right-wing. So there is a strong a strong predilection in the university system in our country, which gives a majority voice to left-wing, liberal, populist, a humanitarian, humanistic sort of approach to, well, basically everything, but in our case, more important, politics in the Middle East. So the majority, I would say, are.
Thank you.
Well, it's be very interesting to see how many of them who are pro-Palestinian used to be pro-Soviet. But I have a second question. You said at the start that you think Gingrich might have done some damage with his comment, and I'm thinking, did he really do any damage? And after I was listening to you, like, it seems to be so pro-Palestinian, the opinions, like, what damage could he do? You know, these people aren't going to have their minds changed. We might as well bring out the other side of the story and tell the truth.
Excellent question.
No, I didn't say do damage. I said that Mitt Romney would call and check with Netanyahu, because it might do damage. I didn't say that it did damage. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it did damage or not. The damage that it could do is to give more ammunition to the extremists on the other side to condemn people who speak the truth.
Yeah, but Stephen, what you're saying is it's always praiseworthy to tell the truth.
Absolutely, I totally agree.
We're going to go to Mark from Atlanta, Georgia, quickly, please, because we're trying to get to some other callers.
Sure. Thanks, Jamie. Mr. Meyer-Levy, I'm wondering, in your article today at Front Page, you mentioned that the way that the Arab leaders reframed the conflict after the Six-Day War and painted Israel as the Goliath and the Palestinians as the oppressed people.
Right.
Given the fact that these observations you've stated about complicity in academia and in the media, and the criticism of Newt Gingrich and his comments,
yes.
What would you say to the alternate take on that not unlike what Reagan did during the Cold War, with calling out the Soviet Union as an evil empire,
right?
And his famous statement, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down the
wall," right?
that might actually be a good thing for a U.S. leader to speak with a strong voice and speak the truth. I mean, as I recall, Reagan was roundly advised against doing that.
Absolutely. Now, Reagan was an unusual leader. I don't want to spend time on him, but there's two things to keep in mind. Number one, he was a powerful, courageous person in his own right. Number two, he held the highest office in the world, the commander-in-chief of the strongest army in the world, the leader of the free world. Now, Gingrich is not in that position. If Gingrich would have waited until he got into that position and then incorporated his thoughts about the invented people into the policy that he would become the proponent of from his bully pulpit, that would be fabulous. Not having waited creates, in my opinion, the possibility of more problems than it does good.
Thank you. We're going to go to Morty from Tampa, Florida. Are you there?
Yes, hello. How are you? Good to...
Thank you for calling, Morty. Do you have a question?
Maury, do you have a question? Oops.
Or did he hang up?
I guess so.
He got scared.
Maybe.
David, let me ask you this with a couple of the minutes left that we
Sure.
have. Your report card of President Obama. This is a president that has turned his back on Israel, has bullied Israel. I mean, he's embraced the Muslim Brotherhood. Is Obama an anti-Semite? How do you see all of this?
It's really hard to say, and I don't like to accuse someone of being an anti-Semite unless I have really, really strong grounds. What is clear, in my opinion, is that he knows exactly what he's doing, and he's doing it on purpose. Now, is that because he hates Jews, or is it because he has a plan of some sort that has not been articulated, at least not to the public, at least not to me, in which he feels like it is better for the USA to make friends with the Arabs than it is to maintain its allegiance with Israel? Now, I can't prove that, but it looks like that's the case, and he is objecting to things which would make perfectly good sense to do, like the recent decision by Congress to cut off aid to the Palestinians because they pushed the UNESCO recognition issue, and then he spoke out against that, and he condemned Congress for doing that. The recent Iranian issue, where Congress had another vote on actions against Iran in terms of trying to prevent them from achieving their nuclear capabilities, and he spoke out against that. And he did not have anything bad to say when Leon Panetta literally turned history, turned reality upside down, and chastised Israel for not making more friendly overtures to Turkey, as though it was Turkey tried to be nice and Israel no, as opposed to the reality, which is Turkey is threatening Israel. So why would Panetta do that? And why would the president remain silent when Panetta did that? So there must be something here where he is saying America needs the allegiance and the friendship of the Arabs more than it needs its relationship with Israel.
I think very much, we're not going to necessarily get into debate here. I think we have an anti-Israeli and even anti-American president in the White House. Monty from Tampa, Florida has regained his courage and called back. Are you there, my friend?
I am.
So you got a little bit scared, and now you've come back. Do you have a question?
I was very nervous.
Okay.
But
it happens.
I've girded myself.
David Mayer Levy does not bite, so ask him a question.
David, thank you. Listen, I actually had I came on late, so I was going to ask a question of when the tipping point was when Israel and the United States went from being somewhat very sympathetic or extremely sympathetic in the world to being kind of the cause of all evil in the world. I'll throw that out there, but it's been answered a bit from what some of the other callers were asking you. But another thing is, I was reading a series of essays on the Brussels Journal by a writer. I can't think of his name now, but he makes an interesting point, which is that he used Winston Churchill as an example and said during World War II, he was able to rally everyone in England, everyone from all political stripes, to fight against the Nazis and to turn back without alienating different political factions. Right. And this gentleman says it's very important that so many of the shows. There is, and I understand it, there's a demonization of the left and left complicity, although there is some right-wing complicity as well, as we've seen with Grover Norquist and others. But what is the efficacy of maybe not of toning down the right-left rhetoric and turning the sort of whole anti-jihad or into sort of a less politicized thing where we can all agree on a certain basic fundamental defense of Western liberal values, where it perhaps doesn't, exclude people and brings people in rather than trying to bash them over the head and convert them to kind of bring them under a broader umbrella. That sounds very left-wing. Go ahead.
It's a very difficult issue because the entire problem itself has been spun out of recognition. Many people that I have a conversation with, or students that I'm talking with in classes, there's no war going on. We're not under attack. I don't know why you're being so mean. People do not realize that we are at war. Now, when they don't realize that we were at war, you cannot rally them to stand up and fight that war because they say, no, there is no war. So the success, and this is very frightening, the success that the Arab propaganda has had in Europe and in the USA and in Canada with creating a fake image of what's happening with the terror war against the West, which began, well, actually hundreds of years ago, but more recently, exactly in 1979, November 4th, 1979 to be exact. Now, that's the beginning of the terror war, and for 30 years, no one has noticed it. And even when we had 9/11, many spokespersons throughout the country were saying, oh, really, America deserved it. Oh, it's America's fault. Oh, because we've been treating people so poorly. This is all nonsense. It's absolute lunacy.
But, thank you, Ward Churchill. Yeah.
Thank you, Monty. Thank you for calling in. We just have a couple minutes left. David, let me ask you this. If the Palestinians were created and do exist solely to destroy Israel, and I think that that's a legitimate thing to say, what hope is there of creating a Palestinian state? Because they've already rejected a state many times. They want to destroy Israel. Is there any way where we can even shape the paradigm in which we think about this?
Well, the shaping the paradigm, how we think, I think so.
Or how the world thinks, not necessarily you and I, but how the world is thinking.
How the world thinks.
Yeah.
There is one way to do it, but it'll take more time than we probably have. The way to do it is to support those institutions, and I'm thinking specifically of the Technion in Israel, which are working to either discover or invent a low-cost, clean, efficient, renewable replacement for petroleum. Okay, if we were to do that, we would bankrupt the oil Arab states and Iran, and there would be no money for this facade, this reversing history, reversing reality, and working so hard, paying so many people to convince the world that black is white and up is down.
Yeah, we got 20 seconds each for Stephen from Toronto. Can you give us 20 seconds, a final thought or question?
Yeah, David, what are the chances that a Palestinian state, do you think, can even be viable? Like, wouldn't they see that as another stepping stone simply to attack Israel and eradicate Israel? Like, what are the chances it can ever make peace with Israel?
Zero. There are no chances. Because of the situation in the entire Arab world and because of generations of hate teach and hate preach, children grow up never having seen a Jew but knowing that they want to kill them. That cannot be changed except over many, many years, and that is why there is no solution currently to this conflict. There is only management of the conflict.
Yeah. And I don't think that stopping Jews from building apartments in that area is going to solve this problem.
Oh, absolutely not. You're totally correct.
Mark from Atlanta, final quick question for our guest.
Yes, David, I'm wondering what you think the prognosis is for increased hostility now that we're seeing. I mean, the U.S. election and the possibility that we may get someone elected who takes a much stronger stance on this Palestinian-Israeli issue. What do you see?
I the exact opposite. A strong
30 seconds, please.
30 seconds. A strong president who speaks the truth and who follows it up with the potential for real action will scare the living bejesus out of them, and they will back down.
That's a great answer. David, Mayor Levy, it was a pleasure and a privilege to have you here. I hope that you'll come back and join us again soon. Thank you very much.
Sure, no problem.
And thank you very much to Dr. Pipes, who joined us earlier in this program. Stephen and Mark, thanks for calling in and joining us. And I'd also like to thank, before I leave, Daniel Ashton, my technical wizard, who is also the technical wizard of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, who makes this show possible. I'd like to send out a special prayer to his dog Yoshi, who was injured in a dog fight. Is he recovering quickly, Daniel? Daniel Ashton?
Yeah, I'm here. He's doing very well.
Is Yoshi recovering?
Yes.
Okay. We're asking the callers to say special prayers. Thank you very much for joining the Jamie Glazov Show. We'll see you again soon.
All right.